Imagine this. You've just bought the latest iPhone 16 Pro Max for all your grandchildren, except one. When that one child, your daughter, looks at you with confusion and asks, "Why don't I have one?" And you look her in the eyes and say, "Because you're not really family." How would you feel? Would you be able to hold back the anger? That's exactly what happened in my house. And the person who said those words, my daughter's very own grandmother. What followed turned into the ugliest family war I've ever faced. My mother-in-law walked into my living room, smug and self-assured, and handed out shiny new iPhone 16 Pro Maxes to every single one of her grandchildren. Except for my daughter, she had no qualms about it. She didn't even flinch. And when my daughter, just 8 years old, looked up at her and asked, "Grandma, why don't I get one?" My mother-in-law simply smiled and replied, "Because you're not really family, treasure. These are only for my blood grandchildren." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The room full of family went absolutely silent. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My daughter, confused and hurt, bolted upstairs, sobbing uncontrollably. And me, I was furious. I looked at my mother-in-law calmly and coldly and told her, "You have 24 hours to leave my house. You're not welcome here anymore." But it wasn't just the words she spoke that shattered everything. It was the look on my daughter's face as she ran up the stairs, broken, her little heart crushed. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. The other family members in the room, they laughed nervously, unsure of what to do. It was then that I realized no one was going to stand up for my daughter. No one but me. Me wife's reaction the next day wasn't what I had hoped for. When I told her what happened, I expected her to be furious, but instead, she seemed indifferent. Her first words were, "Mom's old. I'm sure she didn't mean any harm. You're overreacting again." That was when I realized things were much worse than I thought. This wasn't just about my mother-in-law's behavior. This was about a deeper rift in our relationship. My wife wasn't standing up for me or our daughter. She was standing by her mother. And that's when the real battle began. I tried to stay calm, to reason with her. "You can't let her treat our daughter like this. You saw what happened. It was cruel." But my wife wouldn't hear it. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill," she said, clearly defending her mother's actions. The more I pressed, the more my wife clung to her mother. She told me that her mother had always been difficult, but that didn't mean I had the right to kick her out. "She's family," she said. "You don't just throw family away." I felt the weight of her words. How could she not see the damage her mother was doing to our child? But I couldn't back down now. The betrayal my daughter felt, the humiliation she endured, it was unforgivable. That night, after hours of tense silence, I made my decision. "You have 24 hours to choose," I told her flatly. "Either your mother leaves, or you leave with her." I wasn't bluffing. The next morning, my wife was seething. She stormed around the house, angry that I would even suggest such a thing. "You're so unreasonable," she shouted. "She's my mother. You can't just toss her out. You don't understand what she's been through." But the more she shouted, the more I knew that this wasn't just about a single incident. This was about a deep-rooted problem in our marriage that had been building for years, hidden beneath the surface. She cried, trying to guilt me into backing down. "I can't believe you're making me choose between you and my mother." "I'm not making you choose," I responded, my voice as calm as I could manage. "Your mother made that choice when she humiliated our daughter." But my wife wasn't listening. Her eyes were clouded with loyalty to her mother, a loyalty that had been there long before I entered the picture. For the first time, I realized just how deep the dysfunction ran. My wife had been conditioned to excuse her mother's behavior for so long that she couldn't even see the damage being done right in front of her. In the days that followed, things only got worse. My mother-in-law didn't retreat. If anything, she became bolder. She began making herself more comfortable in the house. She left her things all over the place as if she were settling in permanently. She laughed at my attempts to talk sense into her. "This is my daughter's house," I told her. "You can't just do whatever you want here." "Oh, please," she'd sneer. "What are you going to do? Kick me out? You've already given me 24 hours, but I'm still here, aren't I?" That's when she really started to dig in her heels. She knew she had my wife on her side, and that gave her all the power. It was clear that she wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting to keep control, to tear my family apart, and my wife was letting her. My mother-in-law's behavior only escalated. She made snide comments about how I was lucky to have someone like my wife in my life. She threw little jabs about my financial status, implying that I wasn't good enough for her daughter. But none of this was as bad as what she did next. One night, after I had gone to bed, I woke up to the sound of my wife and mother-in-law arguing in the kitchen. "I'm not going anywhere," my mother-in-law shouted. "This house should be mine anyway. You and your husband can't keep me out forever." When I walked into the kitchen, I could feel the tension in the air. My wife was standing there, face pale and eyes full of tears. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She's my mom, and I can't just throw her out. But you have to see what she's doing to our daughter." "To us," I said, my voice rising. "She's poisoning our family. She's turning you against me, and it's hurting our child." But my wife just shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what's happening anymore. I'm so torn." I was no longer just fighting my mother-in-law. I was fighting my wife's loyalty, her blind allegiance to her mother. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be over quickly. There was a war coming, and it was going to take everything I had to win. The morning after I gave my wife the ultimatum, things went from bad to worse. My wife woke up in a storm of emotion. But it wasn't anger at her mother. It was anger at me. She paced around the house, her fists clenched, eyes wild. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You can't just kick my mother out. She's family. She's old. You don't just toss her aside like that." I felt the tension rise, like we were on opposite sides of a battlefield, and I was losing her. "This isn't just about her being old," I said, trying to stay calm. But it wasn't easy. "This is about the way she treated our daughter. The way she deliberately humiliated her in front of everyone. That's not family. That's not love. You don't get to treat people like that and just walk away unscathed." But she wasn't listening. Instead, she crossed her arms and gave me a look that could have frozen ice. "You don't understand. You don't understand what she's been through." I stared at her, feeling like we were from two completely different worlds. "I understand enough to know that she hurt our daughter. That's not something I'm just gonna forget." The more I tried to reason with her, the more defensive she became. The more I pushed, the more she clung to her mother. And the more I stood my ground, the more distant my wife became. I wasn't just fighting my mother-in-law anymore. I was fighting for my wife's heart, her trust, her belief in me as a partner and a father. Days passed, and each one felt like a battlefield. It was as if the tension was growing with every step we took. My wife and I were living in the same house, but we might as well have been living on separate planets. I started to feel like I didn't know her anymore. The woman I married, the woman I thought I understood, was now completely different. I was no longer her husband, I was the enemy. And then came the little things. They were small at first, like my wife casually defending her mother when she would come up with new manipulative tactics. One day, after yet another argument, I overheard my wife in the kitchen trying to justify my mother-in-law's behavior again. "Mom's just stressed out," she said quietly. "You don't know what she's been through." She didn't mean it. It's just how she is. My chest tightened. The same excuses, the same justifications. This was my daughter we were talking about. "I don't care what she's been through," I snapped, walking into the kitchen. "She has no right to treat anyone that way, especially our daughter. And, you know it. You saw it happen." But my wife barely looked up, like she was trying to avoid my eyes. "I'm just saying, don't be so hard on her. She's been through a lot. You're not giving her a chance to explain herself." "Explain herself?" I shouted. "She humiliated our child in front of everyone. There's no explaining that." But the more I pushed, the more my wife retreated. It was like I couldn't reach her anymore. She started to bury herself in distractions. Her phone, the television, anything that could keep her mind off the fight. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law seemed to be getting bolder and bolder. She was clearly taking advantage of the situation, using my wife's guilt to manipulate everything around her. She started showing up in the kitchen when I was cooking dinner, making herself right at home, as if nothing had happened. She'd sit there, casually asking me questions, trying to start small talk. But every time she opened her mouth, it felt like she was digging the knife in deeper. "Oh, I see you're cooking again," she'd say. Her tone sweet but full of passive aggression. Are you sure you know how to make that? You always were a little too experimental with the recipes, don't you think? And every time she made one of these jabs, I felt the wall between us grow taller. My patience was wearing thin, but I couldn't explode. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed my wife to see it herself. It wasn't long before the emotional warfare became too much. My wife started crying more often, hiding in our room, sobbing in silence. I could hear her at night turning away from me. Her body tense, her shoulders shaking as she tried to hold it together. It crushed me to see her like that, but I also felt completely helpless. She was caught between a rock and a hard place, torn between her loyalty to her mother and her love for our daughter. Why won't you stand with me? I asked her one night, my voice barely above a whisper. Why won't you see that? What's happening here isn't just about me or you. It's about our daughter. She deserves to feel safe. She deserves to be treated with respect. But my wife didn't have an answer. She just wiped her eyes and whispered, I don't know what to do anymore. And that's when my mother-in-law really started to push her limits. The guilt she was planting in my wife's mind became unbearable. She would sneak little comments, manipulative suggestions, always with a sweet smile, like she was looking out for my wife's best interests. You know, honey, she'd say, I've been thinking, maybe this house isn't the best place for me anymore. I don't want to cause any more trouble. I could see my wife's expression change, the flicker of doubt crossing her face. She had been questioning everything for days now, and it was clear that my mother-in-law's poison was starting to work. My mother-in-law wasn't just trying to make peace. She was setting the stage for her next move. The next phase of her manipulations was more subtle, more insidious. She started telling my wife how I was overreacting, that I was being too hard on her. And for some reason, my wife began to believe her. The constant back and forth, my wife defending her mother, me standing firm for our daughter, began to break me down. I could feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I wasn't just fighting for the right to stand up to a bully. I was fighting to save my marriage, my family, my relationship with my wife. It all came to a head when I overheard my wife on the phone with her sister one night. She was crying again, but this time, her words hit harder. I can't choose between them, she said, choking on her tears. I love him, but I can't lose my mom. I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm drowning. That was the moment I knew. My wife wasn't going to change unless she saw the truth with her own eyes. This battle wasn't just going to end with words. It was going to take everything I had to make her see the woman her mother really was. I could feel the walls closing in, but I wasn't going to let things go on like this without understanding what was really happening. I needed evidence. I couldn't keep pleading with my wife when she was clearly too blinded by guilt and years of manipulation to see things clearly. So, I started digging. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to know the extent of my mother-in-law's influence. I started by looking through the bank statements. At first, it was just curiosity. But what I found made my stomach churn. There, right in front of me, were the transactions. My wife's debit card had been used for purchases I never would have agreed to, things that didn't make sense. There was a $340 charge for a luxury coffee maker, a $180 charge for some premium skincare products, another $95 for vitamins that seemed completely unnecessary. And all of this was happening under the guise of treating her health. I couldn't believe it. This was where our money was going after everything that had happened. After my wife had already shown signs of enabling her mother, she was still giving her more control. The anger in my chest flared up, but I knew I had to stay level-headed. I walked over to her, calmly showing her the receipts. You're telling me she's spending our money on this? After everything, is this okay with you? My wife looked away, her face going pale. It's for her health, she said, the words sounding rehearsed. I could see the defense mechanisms kicking in. I couldn't hide my frustration. For her health. Do you see what's going on here? I was angry, but I tried to stay composed. She's using you, and it's hurting our family, but I knew I had to keep going. I had to keep a record. I had to gather the evidence that might finally crack this open. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. Every day, it felt like the situation was escalating, and yet my wife was still stuck in the same loop of denial. She would excuse my mother-in-law's behavior, like she couldn't see the destruction happening in front of her. I noticed the little things first, like when my mother-in-law would walk into a room, all smiles, and act like nothing had happened. She would make small talk, laughing at my expense. "Oh, honey, you're always cooking. Are you sure that's how it's supposed to be done? You've always been a little creative with your recipes, haven't you?" It was as if she had no conscience, no regret, and no hesitation about treating me like I was beneath her. Every snide remark, every attempt to undermine me, it was like a chip away at the foundation of the house we'd built together. But what really struck me was the subtle way she began playing my wife against me. Little whispers when my wife was vulnerable, moments when she was feeling weak. "Don't let him control you, sweetheart," my mother-in-law would say, her voice sweet but laced with manipulation. "You need to stand up for your family. He doesn't understand. He's never been part of our world." It was a slow poison, a way to erode my wife's trust in me, making her feel like she was caught between two sides that could never understand each other. But what hit me the hardest were the silent moments. When I'd see my wife retreating, shutting down when she would catch herself in a lie or try to protect her mother's actions, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. That was when I knew the emotional manipulation was deep, and my wife was getting pulled further in. The more I confronted her, the more defensive she became. Every time I pointed out how toxic her mother was, she'd retreat. She'd justify her mother's behavior with excuses that didn't make sense. "She's old," she'd say. "But she's hurting our daughter, she's hurting us. You don't just get to turn a blind eye to that, and I won't let you." But it wasn't helping. It was only making her feel more isolated, more torn. We were going in circles, and I could feel myself getting weaker. The tipping point came when I found myself in the living room one night, sitting in front of the computer, researching eviction laws. I was preparing for the next step because I had to be ready. I couldn't let this continue. Not for my daughter, not for my family. Then, just as I was going through some paperwork, I saw my phone light up, a notification from the security cameras I'd installed in the house. I wasn't even sure why I'd done it, but I was following the advice my lawyer gave me: document everything. The more you have, the stronger your case will be. I clicked on the video. The first video was of my mother-in-law whispering to my wife in the kitchen. "Once he runs out of money for lawyers, he'll give up. This house should be yours anyway." The calmness in her voice made me sick to my stomach. It was so calculated. She wasn't just playing the victim, she was plotting. The next video was worse. I saw her in the hallway, dragging her suitcase across the hardwood floor, scratching it up as she purposely grinned at the camera. It was a deliberate act of disrespect, as if she knew I was watching and didn't care. I was floored. This was my home. This was my family. And she had no regard for either of them. And then, there was the final video that sealed everything. I found her rummaging through my late father's desk. She was standing there holding a pair of cufflinks I'd inherited, slowly sliding them into her purse. I had to pause the video, the anger hitting me so hard I almost couldn't breathe. I knew this was it. This was my chance to prove to my wife just how deep her mother's manipulations went. That night, I set my plan into motion. I'd been building up to this moment for weeks, and I wasn't going to back down now. I invited my wife to a quiet dinner, candles on the table. Her favorite Thai food. She sat down, expecting an apology. A reconciliation. But this time, it wasn't an apology. Instead, I hit play. I showed her the videos, the whispering, the scratching of the floor, the theft, and finally the call to CPS in her own voice. I watched her face go pale as she saw it all unfold. She was speechless, tears welling in her eyes as she processed everything I had been telling her. You saw all of this," she whispered, choking on the words. "I had to. I had no choice," I said, my voice breaking. "I needed you to understand what I've been fighting against." For the first time, my wife really saw the truth. The woman she had been defending, the woman she had been protecting, wasn't just difficult. She was dangerous. She wasn't just manipulative. She was toxic to our family. When my mother-in-law came home later that night, my wife stood up to her. The words that came out of her mouth were like a release for all the years of resentment and guilt that had built up. "I saw everything," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "You lied, you stole, you pushed my daughter, and you called CPS." For the first time, I saw my mother-in-law falter. She stammered. She tried to deny it, but there was no escaping the truth. And then, for the first time in years, my wife stood firm. "You're not my mother anymore. You're a parasite. You've drained me for too long. Pack your things. You're leaving tonight." 2 hours later, her sister showed up. They forced her to leave. And just like that, it was over. So what do you think? Was I too harsh, or did I do the right thing? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your opinions. If you've faced anything like this before, let me know how you handled it. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that hits close to home.